guys.
Resolve the audio issue yet, have we? We can't hear each other.
Hey, welcome to another episode of The First Layer.
My name's Richard. You know that guy. Wait a second, his audio's not on.
Yes.
That's Brian Baker.
That would help. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Actually, afternoon now.
I think Jerry's here
and
with
I'm
us,
here too.
Hey, Jerry. She can't hear us, but hey, Jerry.
Yep, she can't hear us, but that's okay. My audio sounds horrible.
You sound fine on my side.
I can hear you. I have my headset
Let me
on.
quickly fix that.
Oh.
That probably sounds better.
You would think just moving our show by about 15 hours would somehow make us produce a better quality program. Apparently
You would think so, but that's not the way it goes. All
Okay,
right.
such as the way, I got a monitor arm meant for this camera that I just forgot to buy the right adapter, and I didn't have enough time to print one, so it's sitting on a mug.
There you go. First and foremost, yes, I'm a hairless ape. So
I'm trying to make up for him, don't worry.
I had to. So welcome to the First Layer Live. This is Ask for Help, and this is the show where we answer your questions about 3D printing. Today we've got 4 emails in our questions at the First Layer. We've got one we've got to talk about on Thingiverse, and pretty much that's it. There we go. Now I can hear myself better.
Good stuff.
There-
I tried to set up vMix for the better video quality because what I shoot on this side and what you guys are seeing is like night and day difference. So, but I got to learn vMix.
Well, I'm learning to not listen to myself. I'm learning to listen to everybody else around me because my wife, I need to be able to hear my wife. So I have to put it in through my headphones too, and there's a small delay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's why, pro tip for you guys, if you ever do YouTube, you want to get an audio interface. I do have my Scarlett here. You want to get something professional like this because these devices have a monitor that you can actually monitor your feedback from your own microphone with almost zero latency. And if you ever try to do anything with an audio latency, you're going to notice that like I'll pause myself because I'm hearing myself catching back and it throws my brain right off. So yeah, just make sure everyone talks about cameras, but a microphone is equally important when doing recording.
There you go. Okay, let's get started. First, we're going to say hello to some people. Let me just see if I can go back here a little bit. We've got Guy the Jedi, Sib Husky, Rex Waldy, Around the Yard Fun, Corey Mack, Joseph Jolly, Ben E. Brady. We've got John Isaacson, Culture Maker. I like that name. My good friend Peter Reynolds. Hey, there's Richard Taylor, RT, and DJ Minima? I probably butchered that. There's Tim from DeWitt 3D, The Lightspeed, Dan Hines, or Hints. I think I got Sean. I think I got everybody.
Yeah. I think
you
everybody.
missed Ben.
No, I didn't miss Ben.
Another shout out to Ben. I hope you're feeling better.
Yes. I hope Christy's feeling better, his wife.
Both of you, yes.
All right, so what is this show? If you're brand new here, this show is a show that we do live to answer your questions about 3D printing. We are not experts in the field. We are just doing what we know how to do, and we do research to try and bring you the best advice that we possibly can. So with me, as always, is Brian. We're going to start answering your questions here right shortly. My wife is working on... Brian's losing his camera.
No, I found the piece.
Oh, there we go. Let's start with Around the Yard Fun. I says, so I have an Ender 3 Pro and I'm wanting to print with nylon X filament, but I can't find out how to get the temp up. Can you help? I'm getting a full metal hot end. Okay. What you need to do, if you want to print with nylon, you're going to need an enclosure. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you're going to need to be able to get that hot end up to around 300 degrees. So in the firmware, in the Marlin firmware, you're going to go into the configuration.h file and you're going to slide down until you find the temperatures. There'll be a temperature for the nozzle and a temperature for the bed. The temperature for the nozzle should be set at about 275, but when you go to max, you're only going to get 265 because there's a 10-degree buffer that they set up so you don't burn things out. So if you want to get to 300, you're going to have to set that top temperature to 310.
And
Right?
make sure your thermistor supports that too. You know, we all just assume that all thermistors can go up to crazy temps there, but generally when people are going over 300, they swap it out to a PT100 or an actual thermocouple. And without getting into the boring technologies, an RTD is resistance-based, but a thermocouple generates a microvoltage. So the thermocouple can do a much larger temperature range, on average sometimes up to 1400 degrees Celsius. However, the accuracy at lower temperatures is absolute trash. But if you're printing in those higher temps, you don't care about the lower accuracy. Now, with where we're working within, you can get RTDs that go up to roughly 800 degrees or so, and they do work fine, but you have to make sure you get the right model and make sure you get the right scaler and marlin, or you'll have temperature issues. Nylon, just as an FYI, if you guys ever see a sale on nylon, it's actually worthwhile to pick up a roll even if you don't intend on printing with it, because it is the best nozzle cleaner I've ever used. If you're ever stuck, you can go and put it in there, you know, get that up to like 240, push it through the nozzle real slowly, and then you let it cool, and as you pull it out, it actually has an elasticity property, so it rips out all the little particles inside there. So if you have like an irreparable clog, if you know someone can cut you a couple feet of nylon, it's one of the greatest nozzle cleaners to have on hand.
It is.
Even if it's water saturated, it still works great.
So Sib Husky's asking, what do you guys think about the new belt printer that's throwing its hat into the ring against Creality?
Oh,
I haven't seen the non-Creality one. What about you?
Yeah, I've seen a couple videos on it. Here's the thing about technology and developing products in general is there's always going to be one person to the market who spent all the money to do the research and do the testing, and then it can take under 2 weeks sometimes for a company to even look at a photo of it and replicate all that without doing the necessary research and just do some adjustments. Now, I'm not making any accusations, but I consider this a good thing because I do like the competition in the space. Creality obviously has put their time into the belt printer, and it will, I'm sure, be a good machine. The nice thing is, knowing Creality, it's going to be very hard to compete with Creality's price point, especially with their mass manufacturing. But that being said, I am open to seeing new companies do their own adjustments and do their own tweaks, because competition is always a good thing in this space. Now, this belt printer, if we really want to get into technicalities, if you want to make an Ender 3 a belt printer, essentially, all you have to do is take that Z gantry, build some 45-degree brackets so that it mounts at a 45 degree, create a brace at the top, and then put a belt system in place on the bed, and you basically got the same thing. So, is it really revolutionary? I would say kind of. It really does show a mass manufacturing process for 3D printing, but I think it's more of a proof of concept on the retail space, because where you're going to see this in action in the future is you're going to see a much larger gantry built on a factory assembly line, and you're going to see that belt go for 100 meters or so, or 300 feet, and you're going to have different production lines for mass manufacturing. I think that's where we're going to see this. I don't really see it useful in the consumer space yet. I
don't either, perfectly honest with you. I just don't see it. I looked at the Creality one that they're putting Naomi Wu's picture on, and in all honesty, Okay, we've got a question here from Sean Wandler. He says, hi everyone, my computer recently crashed and I lost all my settings for Cura. I want to know, is there a way that I can gain my settings from one of my old G codes that I had saved on an SD card? Yes. You can actually reload that G code as a profile into Cura. Does it allow you to back that? What's that? Know that actually. I didn't know it allowed you to do that because well, go ahead, give your spiel, and then I'll show the manual effort. Okay. But yeah, you can actually go ahead and put it directly into Cura as a profile. So you can load it in under the import tab in your slicer where all the controls are. Now, the other way to do it is to make sure that all your printers that you have are in Cura first of all. Make sure that they're the latest profiles, not old profiles if you've updated. And then go from there and just start rebuilding. Brian, you want to rebuild?
Yeah, so I was just, I'm just trying to find a G-code file on this computer generated by Cura, but all I got is ones by Simplify 3D. But the process shouldn't be that different. So if I swap over to this camera here, this one here is a G-code file that I generated in Simplify 3D. And you'll notice Simplify 3D, they put all the settings for your G-code right at the top. So it tells you what your processes are, your width, your retraction distances, and everything. So this is actually, this is right at the header. Now I believe the Cura versions, if I go back and try and find a G-code here from Cura, or you know what, let's just generate one. And just FYI, if you are stuck, the new version of Cura 4.8 has some really good profiles. I haven't really covered it much, but in my experience so far, the stock profiles have actually been doing a lot better than my old profiles too. So just bear that in mind, that it might be worthwhile just to give it a shot before you rule it out. Now, if we pull up the Cura here, eventually, unfortunately, it's even with this fast computer, it's not completely fast. Let's go take a file here. Let's take this file that I've been working with, just do a fake slice of it, save it to file. And if we go and open that one up here, where's it hide? Apparently I just cannot type today. You know, it's going to be one of those weeks. CR-10S and the G-code file. If we pull this up here, you're going to see we have the base file information here, flavor marlin, filament used, min X, min Y. It tells us our boundaries, so we know that the part will fit within any printer. And then if we go, I believe it's all the way at the bottom of our G-code file. Here you go. Here is the settings that it puts. The semicolon indicates it's a comment. So your slicer is, when you're running it on your printer, it's actually going to ignore this information. But what you're seeing here is actually the XML data inside Cura, and it's a little bit cryptic, but luckily it's not too many lines to read. What this is showing is what we have deviated from in the stock Cura profile. So you can load up your stock profile, and you can go through and see the technique I used. I called it draft number 2. /n is a new line, and let me see if I can actually format this quickly for you guys. I'm a code guy, so this is okay. This is basically saying it's a multi-line text, and we're just going to go and delete all this out. Maybe I'll write an application.
Yeah, and that makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah, I figured it would. So we'll do, you know, // and I'll write maybe I'll write a program for you guys on this here, and let's change /n to ****, replace all, and replace **** with /n. This is all boring code stuff, and hopefully I can teach you all about this. But here you go. So we've got name draft number 2, definition there. Quality type was draft, setting type quality changes, and you'll see what did I modify? I have infill pattern triangles, infill sparse density 50% because it was a high infill there. Speed for printing was 95 millimeters per second. 6 top layers, wall line count 4. Global quality, draft number 2. And you can see that was basically all I changed apart from layer height down here. So basically, if you go into your Cura G-code file, to summarize all this boring code stuff here, go into your Cura G-code file, browse all the way to the bottom, and your settings information will be there. And it won't be in plain like book text, but if you just kind of read it left to right and move through each line, I think you'll find your modified parameters. The more you've modified from the stock profile, the more settings you're going to have there. And that's my boring G-code spiel for the morning.
And you will notice that at the very top of that, and just before you get into all of those settings at the bottom, you'll notice that there is the actual G-code, your start and end G-code in that file as well.
Yes, there is. You're right.
So let's answer a question from email from Jeff Guyette. He says, hello. First off, I love the show. Thank you very much, Jeff. My question is that I have an Ender 3 Pro and I loaded new Marlin firmware. It was all running great until I tried to load UBL and do a mesh. When I do in the make UBL active on LCD, then run the probing, then save the mesh, then I go to store the settings and it beeps. Then when I go back to the UBL, is no longer active. What am I doing wrong?
UBL is a fun thing. I won't lie to you. I actually don't like to use UBL. I still like to use bilinear myself. UBL, it's supposed to save the mesh whenever you save, but it sounds, I'm curious, did you do a homing by chance after you did this UBL?
He doesn't say in his email.
Okay. Because sometimes when you, if you don't turn on the restore G29 after G28 in Marlin, it will, every time you home, it will go and turn off bed leveling. Yep. And so even though it beeps to say the settings were stored, and you find that's off there, then there might also be something else going on. You might want to reinitialize your EEPROM and then save again too.
That usually is what happens. You have to reinitialize that EEPROM. The problem is that there's not very much memory on those on those boards. I have one right here. So there's not very much memory on this board at all. So
even with the higher end boards like the E3 dip I got here and another E3 dip.
Oh, I got one of those too.
These boards here, their EEPROM chip, I believe, is U5. Oh, I don't even have that camera hooked up right now. But this little guy down here underneath the processor. Now, back a couple months ago, you'll recall I did a review on the E3 Mini V2.0, and they added that chip in there because the 1.2 relied on putting it on the SD card, and that caused apparently a lot of issues with people. Now these chips are even though they have a large die here, you're going to see it's still, let's see if we'll focus there. That little chip there, it's still an actual ROM chip, and it's still rather big compared to the technology there. But that chip only stores, I believe, 256K of SRAM or 512K, or sorry, that's the processor itself. This chip itself is only like 8K, I think, or 1K. They're pretty small little ROM sizes.
It's really small.
And, manufacturers, I think, are going to start scaling it up, but that's they spec out what the maximum storage for Marlin is. And at the end of the day, they're all still the same chips. That's going to be our next technology bump, and we've already seen it with Big Tree, where you can actually buy a little EEPROM expansion board, but Marlin has to know that once the address goes beyond the space of the normal EEPROM chip to overflow into that next chip. And I think the next gen, we're going to see a lot more larger EEPROMs and maybe, hopefully, eventually have all of that mesh data stored in the EEPROM. But until then, it's kind of flaky in my experience.
All right, around the yard fun. He says, I know this might sound crazy, but I don't know how to get a firmware or a firmware. I think he says firmware. I am only 3 weeks into 3D printing. Okay, here's my answer to that. Don't worry about firmware right now. Until it's time to update your firmware, just play with your machine. Have fun with it. Don't worry about putting upgrades onto it. Don't worry about updating the firmware. Don't worry about grabbing somebody because they say it's the greatest firmware out there. Just use what you have. Get used to printing. Get used to your machine. I'm going to tell you guys
right now, pretty much, I'm going to use an asterisk here on this, but pretty much every 3D printer out there right now is running a recent enough version of Marlin that it does not require an upgrade.
Yeah.
Now, if you're adding accessories, you might have better compatibility by increasing the firmware version because you're going to have to rebuild the firmware anyways. But firmware, if we want to use an analogy that hopefully everyone can understand, we've kind of got like three types of wear out there. There's software, firmware, and hardware. Software is the stuff that you can modify freely and you can erase it and the system will still work. It's optional. So if you have your cell phone, for instance, the software would be Android operating system, where you can still wipe it out, reload it, all that. Firmware gets into the back end for the operation of the devices like the cell phone radio, like the bootloader and all the core operations that if you're missing that, your device is basically garbage without getting into low-level programming. It's only meant to be upgraded when there is a security hole or some kind of functionality is required at the software level. And that's where we're in with firmware. And then finally, you have hardware, and your hardware itself is a physical wired interface that cannot be modified without physically replacing something. So, for example, with our E3 dip board here, our processor has a little bit of firmware storage in there, but it's primarily hardware. So it's got internal storage, and the firmware chip, you can flash it by booting up with a bin file on the SD card. Now, unlike software code and unlike SD cards, there are a limited number of read-writes, which hopefully you will never reach that by the time you're getting rid of the board or the printer. But it's not designed to be flashed every single day, and it's not designed to make all these changes. And that's the core operation of your machine. If you're having lots of issues like vibration and stuff like that, you don't need to upgrade the firmware. You just need to adjust the parameters for the motion. And these are things that we talk about as velocity, acceleration, jerk or junction deviation, depending on your firmware version. These parameters define how your machine moves around. And physics change around the world. That's why we leave these parameters open. So an Ender 3, even down here in Okotoks, may not operate the same as an Ender 3 for Richard, based off different mechanical properties, different filament, different slicers, you name it. So there's a fail-safe in there. The firmware is meant to say, hey, you want to go at the fastest speed possible, but I'm telling you, I'm only going to let you go at this speed. That's why your slicer says 5 hours, and sometimes the print takes 10. Is your machine they're overrides designed to prevent, number one, the machine from shaking itself to death, and number two, to keep you in your best quality parameters. So outside of this whole ramble, we do like to talk a lot about firmware because it's always changing and there's new features coming, but you only change the firmware when you need to correct something that cannot be corrected in the same firmware revision.
All right, let's move on to our next question from Pedro Ballister from email. He said, I tried to print a large 400%, 5% infill Lucy the cat, and I'm just going to cut to that now. There we go. So this is the cat he tried to print off of Thingiverse. He says, I had raised some questions on the Octoprint forum that was advised that the filament out and power loss recovery were available only from the CR-10S printing from the SD card. I opened a new spool and started printing uneventfully, predicted over 2 days print. When the print was 43 to 44% complete, the system stopped. There was a filament error message even though there was filament and no jams. I pressed the dial hoping that it would resume and print, but that did not work. I sliced the file with Cura and do not have Simplify 3D. My searches yielded this, and he lists a whole bunch of YouTube versions. He says, I've not removed the print from the bed. How can I try to resume the print using Octoprint? Well.
That's a tricky one. Octoprint, whenever you're dealing with Octoprint, you're basically blindly sending G-code over to the printer and hoping that the printer will execute it. And it doesn't take a lot for it to become desynchronized between the two of them. We found this multiple times.
Yep.
And the power loss recovery feature that they're talking about there is baked into the firmware. However, at the last time I've checked, I don't know, maybe they've gotten better at this, but the printer does not report back to Octoprint that there's a filament run out or that there was a power loss. And so as a result, all Octoprint can do is say, I'm sending line 547, and the printer is just saying, wait, or we're getting no response. And again, this is something about we're daisy chaining two systems for instructions. Marlin has to catch up with more intelligent reports back to Octoprint to tell it, hey, we're doing a filament change, hang on. And so that Octoprint can tell you you're out of filament, or Octoprint can tell you, hey, the printer is power cycled. Do you want to resume from this point? Now, anytime you lose your power on the printer, even though you can resume, it does it on the basis that the Z gantry has not moved whatsoever and that the position that it was in is in a good place. It will still want to home the X and Y, but the Z is presumed. And again, that information has to be somehow fed back to Octoprint. So if you're doing big prints, My recommendation, if you're going to use Octoprint, is to still load it onto the printer's SD card, but initialize the print from the printer's SD card and simply have Octoprint there to monitor it, not to execute the G code. Richard?
Ben is saying you have to have host actions enabled for inspiring to recognize the filament runout sensor. So now the other problem could be the filament runout sensor itself. It is just a little micro switch, and I talked a little bit about this the other day when we were talking on Wednesday. And that little micro switch, the little tab that pushes the micro switch down, breaks off very easily, and then it can cause all kinds of issues. There you go.
Focus on that. Come on, little guy. It's hard
No,
to
not
see.
that one. No, on the actual micro switch, not the micro card.
Oh yeah, inside the yeah.
So when that happens, then we run into issues, and it falsely reports that things are not what they're supposed to be. So double check that first off, that switch is not broken. I used to go through those things like once a month. Now I don't even bother with them anymore. I use something like this one from the Triangle Labs. This one's much better. It works much better as well.
Let's see if I can do some fancy zooming here. Too high. Or you can go with the smart sensor.
I have one of those too.
I got this thing running away there, and it has been solid for this machine. Whoa!
All right. So we've got another question here from PRC 37388. How many profiles do most keep stored for various printings? Is it common to go out and download someone else's profile to have for printing in Cura? Newbie learning here. A lot of people will do at the beginning. I think as you're learning, you're going to try different things. You'll throw it at the wall, see if it sticks. Is it necessary to do? No. Because in Cura, the profiles for each of the machines are tuned for that machine. I've never had an issue where I've had to use somebody else's profile. I've tried many profiles that are out there, but at the end of the day, I just use the stock profile. So that's my short and sweet answer. Ryan?
Yes. Sorry, I was just typing away because Lightspeed was just asking what's smart about that sensor. And if you go back a couple videos here, I did a video on it recently that breaks down the actual functionality of that sensor. So it detects filament runouts, and it also detects jams, which is really nice too. It's a pretty sleek little unit there.
Peter Reynolds is asking, have you guys ever tried Magic Goo? And if so, is it worth the money? Magic Goo is a good product. Is it worth the money over a glue stick? No.
It's a little steep, yeah.
Does it work for what it does? There are different types of Magic Goo for different materials now. So if you're just printing PLA, stick with a glue stick. If you're printing PETG, stick with a glue stick. It's far cheaper. You don't get a flaking. I find Magic Goo gives you a little bit of flaking, and you have to reapply it for every print. That's what I found. Other people may have a different experience.
And for the price of Magic Goo now, you can now get flex beds, PEI flex sheets, the spring steel ones. A bunch of manufacturers jumped on that train, and I've been using those, and I've had no bed adhesion issues whatsoever. Like they're the best way to go. You can kind of see it behind me. Almost every every printer up here does have a flex sheet on it.
There you go.
Yeah.
So around the yard fun, so the Ender 3 Pro only gets to 260. So how do I get it to like 280, 300 or Nylon X? Like we said earlier in the show, you're going to have to change it in the firmware and then re-upload that firmware to your machine.
Now with that too, Ender 3 Pro coming out of the gates, you got to replace that hot end and you got to get a better Bowden tube.
Yep.
You cannot, with the stock hardware on Ender, go safely above 240 degrees, and you definitely can't go above 250 degrees. The
Correct.
reason for that is your Bowden tubing, the plastic that goes from your extruder, the tubing that goes right down. On the Ender 3, I wish one day we'll actually get a cross section of this nozzle to show you, but that plastic goes all the way down and touches your little nozzle. And if you that material starts to get soft around 240 and then starts to warp around 250. So although you may be able to print for 5 to 10 minutes, it's going to start clogging, and then you'll never be able to unclog it because your plastic down there is warped. So when you get an all metal hot end, what that does is that moves that tube back from inside the heated element back up to the cooling fins, where it's much cooler. You're probably only going to be at maximum maybe 120 in there. And then the remainder of your filament path is all metal, and as a result, it will actually be able to flow all the way down into there, and there won't be any swelling of the metal to pinch it. Now, the downside with all metal hot ends is now you have a larger heat transfer area, and so you have to make sure your cooling on your hot end is effective, and you need to make sure to keep your retraction low, because the higher your retraction, it's going to be pulling that hot material into this metal area where it doesn't have the opportunity to cool properly. It can swell, and it will cause a clog.
Yes.
So our recommendation, even if you're only printing PLA with Creality machines, is to take a look into the Micro Swiss all-metal hot ends, as they are a drop-in replacement for your stock Creality nozzle. However, they've got the full all-metal assembly. They've got a better quality nozzle. I believe it's stainless steel. And it's just a matter of transferring over your heat cartridge and your thermistor to that new hot end. The Bowden tube we mentioned, we do recommend Capricorn tubing. Especially if you're doing any kind of flexibles or anything that has any play. The I always mix these up. Is XS something or other? There's a darker Bowden tube.
The XS is the darker stuff.
Yes, this stuff, it has a very tight internal diameter, and so if you use cheaper filaments that can swell up and down, you actually might have more issues with it. But for flexibles, you need to have that tube as narrow as possible to the filament, so there's no wiggle room when extruding. And this stuff is, I don't know, what is it, $20 a meter or something?
Something like that, yeah.
It's really inexpensive to have, and just to buy some extra. It's once you've got that set up, you basically don't have to touch it again.
So I've got a configuration H file open here, and you'll see here down right here, it says above this temperature, the heater will be switched off. So basically, if it hits 275, and you can see that right here by define heater 01 or 0 max temp at 275. Now, it's only going to go to 260 maximum, because it sounds like they've got a buffer built in here now that will only allow it to go to 260. So you're going to have to, if you want to get to 300, you're going to have to put that number at 325 or 315. And make sure that you have a thermistor that is going to be able to handle that, as well as a heater cartridge that will handle that as well. Then you save that, upload it to your machine, and you are all done.
We also have some great feedback in the chat here, if you guys haven't been looking at that, in regards to off-gassing of the PFTE tube. There are safety hazards in going above that. We just talked about the printing limitations, but, you know, this technology is evolving. A lot of people are jumping into it without understanding what a PETG plastic is, what a PLA plastic is, what PFTE actually is, silicon, all that. There are reasons for these materials having MSDS safety sheets and so forth, and it's good to understand that, because, you know, there's a lot of fear-mongering with the risks of 3D printing, and there's also a lot of complacency with 3D printing. The key is just to be smart about it. Don't just assume that, hey, one person said, hey, it's safe, so I can go do it. Do your research and do it safe. And when you do everything safe, you're going to be happy at the end. You know, we're not all going to be dead in 20 years from off-gassing.
There you go. We don't want to kill you.
Yes.
So I want to remind you guys that Super Chat is turned on. If we've answered your question satisfactorily, please help us out by using that Super Chat. It does help us in upgrading our gear and going out and getting new things that aren't sent to us to review for you guys in future episodes. So Keith Bell, he has a gantry problem. He says gantry does not come down all the way at the start of a print. He says I have a problem with the X gantry not coming down all the way at the start of the print, and then have to tune it by baby steps. What can I do for my Ender 3?
If you're baby stepping,
Richard, what are you taking in your coffee? Nothing. Just coffee.
What is, are you using an ABL, any kind of bed leveling sensor, or are you using the switch? If you're using the switch, and you're finding you have to baby step it down, you're actually probably going to want to relocate that switch because you're applying unnecessary pressure to it if you're going below it. Yeah. Now, if you have an ABL and you're always having to baby step it down, your chances are your probe is not calibrated correctly. So I'm going to pull up Visual Studio Code here real quick. And see if we can go over the section about the offsets. What you need to know about baby stepping by default is baby stepping does not save job to job. Baby stepping is meant as a per job override.
Correct.
And so if you have to make a large baby step change every single print, then your Z offset is the problem. So if we go down to, let me see if I can find it here, probe offset. All right, here we go. So if we migrate over to this, here is your section in configuration.h. And so it has nozzle to probe offsets, XYZ, use a caliper to measure the distance. So if you take a look, this image down here is really good. They kind of show, for example, right plus, back plus indicates that it's actually further back because one is the nozzle here, and it's to the right. I'm sorry, these numbers are a little messed up, but what you need to know is that it goes X, Y, Z, right? So it says, in my case, minus 44. If we were to draw this out, it would indicate that if our nozzle is dead here in the center, my nozzle minus 44 is 44 millimeters to the left, because we're always going based off our origin point down here. So if we take a look at N being the center, and if our nozzle is, say, over here, what we know is that it's relative to the 0, it's actually in a negative value, so it's negative 44 to the left, and it's minus 6, which means it's 6 millimeters back from the nozzle relative to this origin point. And then finally, the one that we're talking about right now is your height of your probe. Now, this is the point where when your probe is dropping, and we'll use this linear actuator here as an example, when your probe is dropping down to the bed, when it touches the bed and bounces back into its own assembly, it assumes that's Z0. But if your nozzle's up here, we need to find out what that distance between when it touched the bed and your nozzle is. And the easiest way of doing that is once you've finished printing, or once you've finished doing your homing and you've got it up, you'll see that your Z is, I think, about 5 by default in the firmware, plus or minus your Z offset. So go into that menu and move your probe, move your hot end down until the printer says it's at Z0. You're going to see a little air gap on there, and that's when you want to bring out your trusty pair of calipers and try to get it in there and measure that distance between the nozzle and the bed. Now that distance, if you make it negative, so let's say it was 1.6 millimeters higher, you're going to make that negative and you're going to put that in as your Z probe offset, saying that your probe point, that when it touched the bed, is 1.6 millimeters below where the nozzle actually is. And that will get you your Z0 pretty much dead on every time.
There you go. All right, one more question in email, and then the rest of the show is going to be dedicated to what's in the chat. This one comes from Pedro Ballester. He says, my factory sensor is defective. I ordered limit switches from Amazon, but they don't have the blue LED. How can I add a LED to the switch? You would add it on the same 2 pins that you're plugging into, and that way when it triggers, that will come on.
Yes, LEDs,
that's simple.
Without getting into boring specs of LEDs, the LED by itself, if you just bought a diode online that just has the 2 prongs coming out of it, you're probably going to overheat it and kill it in half a second. An LED does a voltage drop, but it has no current limitation, so you need to add a resistor in there. So if you're going to add something like an LED, find out what the voltage out is on the pin you want to tie it to. Whether in a 3D printer, it'll either be 5 volt, it'll either be 3.3 volt, 5 volt, 12 volt, or 24 volt. The reason there's so many options is because if you have an 8-bit board, for instance, one of these guys right here, these guys, the main processor is a 5-volt chip, and therefore its I/O is 5 volts. When you get into the E3 boards, the processor itself actually runs on 3.3 volts. But there are chips in here to bring things such as the end stops up to 5 volts. It's important to know this because if you overvolt it, well, LEDs can pop, they can catch fire, they can get hot. So make sure if you're going to buy something on Amazon for an LED, make sure it's got all the circuitry in there so that you can literally just hook it straight up to a 5-volt source and not be worried. The only time you're going to hook up a 12-volt LED or a 24-volt LED is if you're tying it to your motor coils, or you're tying it to any of your hot end output, your bed output. They're all just indication lights. But just make sure you know what you're hooking up to. That's my safety tip.
All right, I think we got another question coming in from my wife over here. She's got one. She's going to send it across so we can see it.
I lost it. It won't go down as far as it is.
Oh, you lost it. Okay, just go on to the next question then. It'll only take so long.
Or I'll find. I know which one it is.
In the meantime, I'm getting harassed by alterations for my BLV video. Guys, I am so sorry. This year has been a complete write-off for me developing content here. So that's between Richard and I. We know we've had a terrible hiatus, I think, roughly for the last month and a half.
Yeah.
Just getting things back into place without getting into the current world situations. They've just changed the rules here to work from home and no social gatherings whatsoever. So I can't even go and see Richard, unfortunately. So him and I are shooting content separately for the time being, getting this all sorted out. We're bringing you content soon. Without getting into details of what we are reviewing right now, we've had some major hiccups and we're having a hard time getting feedback from vendors. And we're unfortunately getting to the point of giving them the ultimatum of either you need to provide some information or this review is not going to be what you want.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at right now. We are definitely trying to squeak in here, get some new content out. But when you can't go outside, you can't do anything inside, it's very hard to do collaborations. So we will be bringing you something hopefully soon here. I've got a couple of things on my docket hopefully for this week. And I do have December 25th to January 1st off. So I'm hoping to get you some more content in that time.
There you go. And we've been redoing the sets here and building another set in another room of our house. So it's been fun.
Mm-hmm. Just catching up on a question we had up here earlier. Sorry about that SMX 235 flyer. We got stuck on another question there.
I posted it under my name.
Yes, thank you. My wife likes small.
Here it is.
Printed.
It's coming.
Perfect. Should I try a 0.2 millimeter nozzle, and how does that affect profile settings? Well, I've seen a lot of people go with 0.2 nozzles, and I won't lie to you. If you asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said, cool, awesome. But now resin printers are so cheap and can do that precision so much better. I would say go that route because if you've never changed a nozzle, there is a chance that you could make your print settings worse if you don't know how to properly install that nozzle. It's a good experience. True. And the 0.2 nozzle, again, it's going to take a long time to print these items. With a resin machine, we saw sales, I think, last week as low as $180 Canadian for a resin machine now. And if you got the room for another machine, anything small enough to fit on that machine, I go right to that right away instead of using my FDM machines. Now, that being said, if you do want to go to a 0.2 nozzle, yes, you will get a lovely printing experience. It'll take you 4 days sometimes to print a really small
totally.
part.
I totally go with the resin printer.
Yeah. Jerry loves her resin one. Richard loves his. I love mine. It's my most reliable machine. I kind of get mad because I look at it and I'm like,
I like trinkets too.
On there right now. I can use excuses for my other machines that, hey, they're down, I can't print something. That machine doesn't go down, so it's like, man, time to set it up again.
Yeah, I think that if you're going to want to go to a 0.2 nozzle, I don't personally recommend it because I can't tell you how many times I've seen people put a new nozzle in and they don't know why things aren't working.
Yes.
Some things to take into consideration. First, if you're going to change the nozzle, you really want to have it's set in your slicer as well. You're going to have to change it there. Secondly, you want to make sure that it's tightened correctly. And thirdly, you're going to want to adjust the speed in your slicer as well as it prints. So by going to a nozzle that's half the size, you're going to run into twice to 3 times the time it's going to take to print it.
Super chat.
We just got a super chat from SMX 235 Flyer. Thank you very much. We do appreciate
and
the
just to give you an
super chat.
example, here was something I printed this week on a 0.4 nozzle. This is one of those SD card holders. And, you know, at this detail level, I can't even really tell that it's a 0.4 nozzle because it's just so smooth and shiny. A 0.2, again, you know, you're going to be increasing your print time by it's going to be about 4 times longer because volumetrically, 0.2 millimeters is about, you got to remember it's 0.2 by 0.2, so you square it. So it's going to, quadruple the print time. It's going to require a lot of tuning, as Ben Brady was saying, which is true. And at the end of the day, you're going to wait longer to find out if your results are worth it. Plus, you're not actually increasing your Z resolution. So this one was printed at, I think, 0.16, and it's pretty darn sharp. I could go down to 0.12 or even 0.08 with a 0.4 mil nozzle. So I would experiment more with those layer heights and also with dialing in your flow rates because eventually you can get something on an FDM machine that looks like this, which, it's not going to come through as sharp on this camera here, but you're going to see there's almost no visibility of layer lines on this. And there's just a bit of support interface. And, that's the key, is always dialing in for these filaments. You'll be surprised what a 0.4 millimeter nozzle can get you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Dean, he says, I understand that bed leveling is crucial to quality prints. Other than the paper method, are there any other products sold that are more accurate than a piece of paper? Well,
Yell touch?
let me take this one because I'm the king of bed leveling.
Sure.
I'm going to tell you straight up, there's nothing better than a piece of paper. Honestly, there's nothing better. I've used every bed leveling method known to man. For manual bed leveling, including shims and the whole 9 yards. The key is make sure everything is square, make sure your bed is level, and use that piece of paper just till you get that little bit of drag. And once you've got it, you're there. And in all honesty, that's the way I would stay, Dean.
Yeah, Alterations was saying about the gaps. I thought I had mine nearby here for the gauges. They're okay. The problem with a gauge is, number one, getting down to that smallest size. You can have a hard time getting the right width there sometimes. Mm-hmm. But the other thing, too, with the gauge is the gauge has no compression factor. So when you go and apply that nozzle and you bring it down and you're bringing your bed up, you could actually be, without having the paper to have that compression to feel it around, once that little shim there touches the nozzle, it's actually going to start compressing the bed springs down. So even though you're tightening it up, you may actually be compressing those springs down too. So although it's very reliable, when you're dealing with a piece of paper, the variances in paper won't generally show up on your base layer. But it sounds like if you're having trouble with your paper leveling method, you might actually have some warping in your bed. So what I would recommend is once you've got all 4 corners leveled, take it to one of the corners, put the piece of paper down in there, and then using your hands, just tram the nozzle a little bit and just feel that paper and see if it's getting more firm or less firm as you're going across the centers. You may have an inherent slightly warped bed that's not visually there. And in items like that, you can either replace the bed, get a piece of glass, or get something like a BL Touch, which has a accuracy of 0.001 millimeters when dialed in correctly, and let it determine those variances in your bed and compensate for it as it prints.
All right, I know there's some more questions coming in. I saw one from Around the Yard Fun.
PRC 37388 asking about the spring steel bed. The one I use is energetic. I've noticed that Navajo 3D Printing, the guys that are selling refurbished Creality machines in the US, they've just become the official distributor of those in the Americas. Otherwise, I go to AliExpress and I buy them direct from the manufacturer. Up here in Canada, we don't have, I think we got a couple different ones on Amazon, but nothing bigger than 235 by 235. I think the one we have on the Wanhao here is by BQ or Big Tree Tech or whatever you want to call them these days. So if you go onto Amazon and find a spring steel sheet, chances are it will probably be good enough for your application.
Around the yard fun, do I need anything special to print Nylon X? As we said earlier in the show, you are going to need to upgrade your hot end, first and foremost. Once you've upgraded that hot end, you should be fine. You'll also need to upgrade your thermistor, get a proper thermistor that will handle those higher heats. So that's the short answer to your question.
Dwayne King saying, I have a BL Touch installed in my Ender 3. It glows a nice red glow. I love that red glow, and I love the little blue LED that seems to show up on 80% of my printers, but not on the others.
Chris Travis is saying, the other problem I have with resin is the fumes. My wife is very smell sensitive, and I would have to use the printer out in the garage. Chris, there are resins out there that have very, very low to no odor. Just check on Amazon. You've got some, don't you, Brian?
Yeah, most of, from my experience, any colors that are transparent, that are see-through, have a much more pungent odor. Some of the earlier stuff I worked with, different brands, I'm trying to remember half them, but they really were very pungent. The latest Elegoo stuff I've been working with has been very low odor. Now, that being said, don't assume that the odor itself does not indicate the toxicity. And we need to be very clear about that. If you're working with resin printers, you do have to keep them in an open space, preferably with ventilation. And if not, just make sure there's air circulation through them. Don't put them in your bathroom. If you're going to put them in your garage, consider cracking the door on your garage or having a vent fan. And just be smart about it. You know, if you are sensitive to fumes, you probably should be wearing some form of a mask. An actual N95 filtering mask, not the facial masks that are required for today's conditions. Have a proper mask and protect yourself, because these are all emerging technologies. There is no long-term studies of 20, 30 years saying if there's long exposure impacts. So just do yourself the favor and follow your proper safety methods, and you'll have no problems whatsoever.
Okay, we've got a couple more here. We've only got less than 10 minutes, so we'll take a couple more questions.
I'll just say I played with the water washables a little bit. I personally don't have a bottle, but I've actually been really impressed with the results of those. I'm still using ones that I require isopropyl and mean green or simple green to clean, though.
PRC 37388 says leveling a bed that has a dip in the middle is painfully impossible. I print on the sides for now until I get glass under or upgrade to a spring steel bed. Even a spring steel bed is going to give you that dip. If you've got a dip, that magnet's going to pull it in. So I would recommend you go to glass. If it's still got too much of a dip, you can take some masking tape or some painter's tape or some Kapton tape and put it where that dip is. It will help to bring it up. So your bed will become a little bit more level and easier to level all the way around. Pat Burke says,
I knew I got his name wrong. It's Navarre 3D printing, not Navajo.
Okay.
We have a place in Calgary called Navajo Metals, and that's where my brain went.
Pat Burke says, I have a problem in which the third and fourth layer does not raise up enough. The nozzle just squishes out on the previous layer. If I didn't lift it, then the whole thing will shift. It sounds like what's going on is your wheels on your printer aren't tight enough and they're slipping down.
It could also be binding on the Z-rod.
Yeah, that could be too.
We haven't talked about that in a long, long time there, but it doesn't hurt to inspect your Z-rods once in a while. Some people will go and put a silicone-based lubricant on there just to make it glide up and down. There are different methods there, but just take a look at your Z-rod and see if they're really black. You know, take a piece of paper towel and just wipe around the outside of the rod. And then either with the motors on, have it move up and down. I've actually written a couple of G-code files that just have it go G1, Z300, G1, Z0. Just have it go up and down for a while and have it work through there and see if there are any hesitations in there. If there are hesitations, Then you want to inspect your eccentric nuts, make sure it's all tightened up properly, and make sure your rods have adequate lubrication and aren't clogged up with dust or fur or whatever gets in there.
Alterations also says check the couplers. That's very important as well.
Yes, that one's bit us a few times. Pat Burke saying tried 3-in-1 oil. That stuff, I can't get it in Canada, so I've been trying other products. I do have some super lube downstairs. I'm experimenting with my linear rails, but for any kind of rods, there are temporary lubricants and there are permanent ones. I'm going to say this right now. Do not use WD-40. That's a water displacement, and it will bind up with it. You want a very free-flowing lubricant that will not jam and preferably will not stay in location. You just want to have it freely moving.
Yeah. 1945 Bozo. Where can I find the Ender 3 plastic print sheet? You layer with pie that you can attach with the clips to the heated bed. Okay. First and foremost, what you're asking for is that little plastic sheet that goes underneath the black portion. I think you can get it directly from Creality. The black bed that's on top, or the black material that's on top of those plastic sheets, that is basically just build tack. So you can get build tack anywhere. And there's different brands that are all the same. Essentially, it's build tack. It's just a textured surface that goes on top.
But you know what? Again, if we're buying into this, I'll show you this right now. This is the one I run on my Wanhao, which is the same size as the Ender 3. Look at this. They've got, you want to get the one with the sticker, but $45 Canadian is going to get you a magnetic sheet and a spring steel sheet that will actually conform into there. Now, the benefit of these, number one, your bed adhesion, way easier. In fact, look at this. They got an $8 coupon, so that'll bring it down to $37 Canadian, which is just a bit below 28 bucks, 29 bucks American. That'll get you the magnetic sheet if you don't already have it. That'll get you the spring steel sheet, which is double-sided, does not require glue stick. It does have a texture, but you can literally pop it right off the machine and pop your print right off. We've been swearing by these. You can even get ones as big as 310 now on Amazon, which is really nice. You never used to be able to. And you can actually buy multiple sheets too. So if you're doing multiple print jobs, you can just go and swap them out job to job. These are just fantastic. The only thing I've noticed is when you deal with, they're showing up to 200 degrees. That's for the actual sheet. We have found that when you go above 80 degrees, sometimes the glue on the back of these magnetic sheets starts to soften. And so sometimes it can lift a little bit. But if you're printing at PLA and keeping that bed at 60 degrees all the time, man, these just changed the way I dealt with bed adhesion. Like every time the filament stuck to it, as long as you keep the bed warm, it sticks like glue. And then once it cools down, half the time I can just reach in and lift the model right off the bed without even removing that flex bed. So if you're in the market for that, and as well too, if you don't like it, it's completely reversible back to a glass bed or to these clip-on beds. But you don't need clips anymore. You don't need any of that boring stuff. It truly did change this industry.
Yeah, we both have them, and I enjoy mine. I've got one on an Ender 3, and I've got one on the CR-10S, and I love them. They work great. Absolutely. All right, I think we're pretty much at the end of the show. 2 minutes to wrap things up. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today. I want to thank my wife, who's been putting up the questions for us so that you guys can see them and we can answer them. She's been doing a great job with that.
Yes, she has. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to thank Brian for being here again this week, as he is with me every week. We are starting to make some changes in the show as to when things are released, and Sundays are looking to be our best day to do our live stream at noon. I know some people can't join us, but based on all of the projections and all of the data that we've looked at for the last year, this is going to be coming in the new year, our norm, where we do Sunday afternoon at noon. And hope you guys enjoyed it today. And we do appreciate everybody coming by to ask questions. And, we do what we do.
Covered how they can send us questions, can they?
Oh, we did not. Let me just bring that up. Thank you. All right. So if you've got questions, you can send them to questions@thefirstlayer. firstlayer.com. And if you send them anywhere else that at the firstlayer.com, chances are we're not going to get them, because a lot of stuff goes into my personal junk mail. Info stuff that is usually is people that are want to send me stuff for review. But if you've got a question, please write this down. Questions at firstlayer.com, and you will get your question answered. We'll put it on the show, and we will go from there. And there we go. That is 1 o'clock. That is our hour. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. I want to see you guys next week. We'll probably release our video on Saturday morning. New videos are going to start being released on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And our live
we got bogged
streams.
down with these reviews, so we're going to put some non-review content together here for you guys.
Yeah.
Now is a good time to think ahead, especially with everything changing. What are you guys looking for this Christmas or this holiday season? Are you going to be getting something cool? Are you going to get a brand new 3D printer for Christmas? Are you going to get some upgrade parts? You can get some new filament. Let us know in the chat. Let us know in the comments. And we're going to be putting together some stuff here today too. We're not going to restart our cycle of fundamental prints, but we're going to go back and say, hey, you know what? Now you got new technology. What do you want to do with it? So if there is something covering up, including alterations, yes, your BLV video will be coming. I do just have to reshoot it now because I got super disorganized. And when you have as many SD cards as I do, things just go missing. So that was my boo-boo. Machine is, if we look up there, there it is. She sits. See, there's some BLV hiding up there. Yeah, that machine is in a few pieces right now. So we'll get that rebuilt. We'll do some tests, and you'll be seeing the whole whip-dang doodle on linear guides. It was something I was very proud of, and so I'm bummed out that I lost the footage, but we'll go at it again.
Now, if you guys want to see a video on how to put together a printer, again, I've got a Lotmaxx SC-10 sitting in a box that I've not opened yet. If you guys want me to do a video on that, walking you through from beginning to end, if you're brand new to 3D printing, we'll show you exactly how to level the bed and do all that nice stuff. Leave us a comment after the stream, and we will be happy to do that. We're going to be launching our join button in the new year as well. Brian and I have been working on some stuff so that you guys can get some nice freebies if you become a member of our channel. And we'll let you know when all that rolls out. So until that time, remember that the first layer is always your foundation to a great print.
We'll see you next time.